Welcome to Coach Parry's Mythbusters. In this video, we're delving deep into the world of running myths to separate fact from fiction. We've got 7 in all to get through, from lactic acid to carbo-loading to knee health to whether or not you're a real runner. We're here to reveal the truth. We'll even challenge the finite heartbeat theory. It's time to bust those running myths wide open and equip you with the knowledge to optimize your running experience. So let's get started.
So the first myth, and one of the most common myths that persists in running, is the lactic acid burn. You hear this at the end of a race when people talk about I'm getting tired and you feel pain in your legs, and it's always blamed on lactic acid. Lactic acid has become the big catch-all bad guy for all things fatigue related. But the reality is that lactic acid has absolutely nothing to do with that burn that you feel in your legs. So the first thing is we actually don't produce lactic acid, but when you burn glucose, you produce lactate. So because it was lactic acid, we assume that this is the thing that's causing that lactic acid burn. But what is an acid burn? The acid burn comes from the release of hydrogen ions that then drop the pH in the cell. And these hydrogen ions don't actually come from the lactate, but they come instead from the breakdown of ATP. When the cell breaks down ATP, it releases a phosphate group and a hydrogen ion. And that hydrogen ion drops the pH in the cell, and that produces that burn that you experience.
I have so many friends who, when they want to start running, go, "Oh, Shona, I don't know how you do this. Running is just, it's so hard all the time." And I'm here to tell you that that is not true. The reason they think that it's hard is because they're doing it wrong. Right? So if you start running, or even if you are running and you've been running for a while, running shouldn't feel like it's hard work all the time. If that is what it feels like, you're running your easy and your long runs a little bit too fast, and you're probably hurting yourself, and that's why you think it's really, really hard. So if you're starting out running, you want to really make sure that that running session feels easy. So take a couple of walk breaks, make sure that you're slowing down and that you're not going out too hard. Running fast and hard is not what's going to make you a better runner.
Another myth that needs to be busted is that of carbo loading. There is no blanket approach. Not everyone should be doing the same thing. More recently, new evidence has come out to say that old way of thinking in terms of carbo loading, heavy amounts of carbohydrate intake before your event, is actually not true. What we should be doing is focusing on your needs and the demands of the event and the training you are doing specifically. Carbo loading is not a blanket approach. It needs to be individualized, as I mentioned, to what your specific needs are and for what you are training for. Another old school approach to carbo loading is the thought of having to deplete your carbohydrate intake, then heavily overload, then deplete and overload. And ultimately all that's doing is actually causing an added stress to your body that when you are in training, and in particular prepping for the final couple of weeks before your race, is really a stress you don't need to be putting on yourself. Current research suggests you should be tailoring your carbohydrate intake for the demand of your training or event that you are going to be doing based on the effort. So this is not a one-size-fits-all or a blanket approach that everyone should be taking in this many grams of carbs. It needs to be specific to you so that you are matching your fueling needs. Just to touch a little bit more on those fueling needs, we're talking about different intensities, and intensities much as when you're driving in a car, the faster you go, the more fuel you need. The same really applies here. At lower intensities, you can get away with less carbohydrate intake, or at least less demand on the body. And the higher the intensity, the more carbohydrates you should be taking in. This is also to say that because you've carbo loaded, or you've been taking in carbs regularly before your training, before your races, it's not to say that you should not be taking in anything during that event. That's still important. During training runs, in particular the long runs, or your event, you should still be taking in carbohydrates, but this is really focusing on that loading pre-event. Meeting these demands and talking about effort levels, you are generally going to be well loaded with carbohydrates, especially when you get into that tapering phase before your race. Remember, as we taper, you are going to be reducing your training volume or reducing your training intensity, whichever works best for you and whichever plan you're on. But with lower volumes and intensities and still eating the same amount of carbs, that in itself is picking up your stores of glycogen, as opposed to that old school way of thinking where we need to hammer in extra carbohydrates. There's no need to take in more. Just in itself, by lowering your volume or intensity, you generally will be storing more glycogen in the muscles for race day.
If you're a South African, you're probably as tired as I am of hearing, if you don't run comrades, you're not a real runner. The reality is that there are so many ways to explore your running potential. And I'm just as impressed with someone who's running their PB over 5Ks as I am with someone who can finish the Comrades Marathon. So don't let other people tell you what kind of runner you need to be. Just get out there and enjoy running. My second least favorite thing is when people say that if you can't run the whole distance, you're not a real runner. And I'm a big advocate of a run-walk strategy, and I've shown so many times that people run their PBs and run better and improve their running by adding a run-walk strategy into their run. So again, if you're out there and you are running, then you are a runner, and don't let anybody tell you any different.
I'm so tired of hearing people say, oh, running is really bad for your knees. If you have a little bit of knee pain, that's because you run too much. That is definitely not the case. You know what is bad for your knees? Doing nothing is really bad for your knees. Of course, if you're running too much and you're not recovering enough, or you haven't necessarily added enough strength training into your running, you can get sore knees. So we want to be smart about it, but it's not the running that is causing your knees to be painful. It's the fact that you don't have strong muscles or the structures around the knee that is causing your knee pain while you're running. There is often a misconception as well that running causes osteoarthritis in the knee, or that it's really, really bad for someone with osteoarthritis. That is not the case. The science at the moment is really showing that people who are runners do not have as much risk of getting osteoarthritis versus people who are non-runners. And so running is actually helping them, or helping to prevent them getting osteoarthritis. If you are already a runner and you do have osteoarthritis, it is really, really key to add some strength training into your plan so that you can look after your knees. Again, the science is showing that is helping osteoarthritis and the effects of knee osteoarthritis in particular.
So a strange myth that persists is that running somehow makes you lose heartbeats. There's this idea that humans have a finite amount of heartbeats, and no one actually knows how many it is, but they say it's around 2.5 billion heartbeats over your lifetime. So the idea then is that if you do any activity like running or any other exercise that raises your heart rate, you're going to be losing heartbeats and therefore shortening your life. To be honest, there's no such thing as the finite heartbeat theory, because if you think about it, firstly, we can't work this out because everyone lives to be a different lifespan. But if you think about what exercise does, when you get fitter, your heart rate actually drops. So your normal heart rate during the day drops. And even though you're exercising for a certain amount of time and you're running at an elevated heart rate, over the course of your lifetime, your heart rate is actually beating a lot slower than it was before you were fit. So you're actually preserving heartbeats. So even if this theory was true, running would actually extend your life and not shorten it.
The last myth is that you must do static stretching before a run. The research shows that there is no difference in injury incidence in a workout whether you do stretching before or not. What the research, however, does show that doing stretching and having flexibility and mobility as part of your overall training structure does reduce injury risk over time. And so as part of your warm-ups, we encourage doing some mobility and some dynamic movements to get your body ready for the workout that you're about to do, and that you do more mobility and some stretching post-workout.
That said, there is a better way to increase your flexibility and mobility as a runner than just stretching and hoping for the best. So watch this video next for our simple 3-step method that'll transform your running. So say goodbye to carbo-loading confusion and the rigid definition of a real runner. You can now run with confidence knowing that it's not detrimental to your knees. Myths busted.